Hi, this is video 3 of 3 for the energy systems. We're going to just quickly review the sources of energy. So adenosine triphosphate being the only energy that the body can use for muscle contraction. Phosphocreatine, the high energy compound of phosphate and creatine that we use for the ATP-PC system. Glycogen and glucose, which we're going to talk about again today. We used it for the lactate system and we use it for the aerobic system. I'm going to look at fats today because we also use that in the aerobic system. So they're brilliant for energy, really effective in terms of the amount of energy we can gain from them, but not very effective or efficient in the fact that we have to use an awful lot of oxygen to break them down. So they're very slow, but very useful. And protein that we mentioned in the first video that we can use for energy, but we don't tend to use it for energy as it's not very efficient. And really we need the protein for repair and growth of new cells, particularly muscle fibres that we're looking at the moment, to increase your. So we looked at adenosine triphosphate being the only source of energy we can use for muscle contraction, and we looked at adenosine diphosphate and its resynthesis using phosphate ions to regenerate, to resynthesize ATP for muscle contraction. We looked at the phosphocreatine system as a high energy compound used for very fast, high intensity activity. And we looked at glycogen and glucose, and one was stored, one was in the bloodstream, slightly less concentrated. And this is the new stuff. If there's anything you didn't understand so far, including the lactate system, please go to video 1 and video 2. So we're looking at fats then, and these are stored under the skin, but they can be dissolved in the blood when the muscle fibre needs them for contraction. So they can be dissolved in the blood, and when fats are dissolved in the blood, we call them fatty acids. They must have oxygen to be broken down, so they can only be used by the aerobic system, which we're looking at today. An interesting fact, but not on our specification, is that it takes around 100 times longer to produce energy using fats as our source of energy than the ATP-PC system, and this is because of the amount of oxygen and the number of chemical reactions we need to break down fats. So carbohydrate for the aerobic system is our preferred source, but if we run out of that, or if our exercise intensity is so low that we've got the time to break down the fats using all this oxygen, then we would use fats. Protein is occasionally broken down to make energy, but it is our emergency source, as I've mentioned, and it is better used for repair and growth of muscle cells, for example. When we might use it would be at the end of an endurance race. So we've got the 3 energy systems. We've looked at this ATP-PC system in video 1, the lactate system in video 2, and today is all about the aerobic system. So let's have a look at the aerobic system then. It is the complete breakdown of glucose or fatty acids to provide a majority of the body's energy. So this is amazing, really. If we break down one glucose molecule, we can get a yield of 38 ATP molecules. It was 1 ATP resynthesized using the ATP-PC system for every molecule of phosphocreatine. Through the partial breakdown of glucose, we yielded 2 ATP in the lactate system, and we're going to get from one glucose molecule 38 ATP resynthesized. So efficiency-wise, this system is the most efficient. It's going to break down glucose completely to suck out every last drop of energy it's got for muscle contraction. It can only be used for low intensity exercise because it's a slower process. It's much slower. We have to break it down completely. We have to use oxygen. We've got to get that oxygen in to our muscle cell. It takes a lot longer. There are also a lot more chemical reactions that are going to happen. one of which you know about, so this is brilliant. Glycolysis occurs. So it's exactly the same as the lactate system, but this time when it gets to pyruvate, we've got available oxygen to bind with the pyruvate, which immediately takes it into the next stage, which is called the Krebs cycle. This occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria and the muscle cell. And finally, we've got the electron transport chain, and this is where most of the ATP is yielded. So 34 will come out of this electron transport chain, and this occurs in the cristae of the mitochondria in the muscle cell. The mitochondria is a cell that looks similar to this in the muscle cell, and it's called our powerhouse. It's our energy maker. So let's take a look at how these three systems work. Now, if you Google this, you will find an incredible amount of information. BTEC do not require us to know all of this information, but the general principles. So let's have a look and see what we can figure out from this. Now, you have got access to this on the OneNote for a little poster to stick in and then make your own notes on the top. But let's start up at the top here. We're looking at glycogen, and it's in the liver, which is this lovely picture here, and in the skeletal muscle cell. That's where it's found. So we've got glycogen. It is moved into the bloodstream, and it is broken down and travels as glucose, as we know. Then it travels via the capillary network and arrives into the muscle cell, which you can see here in green. Within the muscle cell here, we will go through the process of glycolysis, okay? Glycolysis in the sarcoplasm of the muscle cell. So we've got glucose here. We've got enzymes working on that glucose to partially break it down to pyruvate. So exactly the same as the lactate system. If not enough oxygen is possible, or we can't get enough oxygen in because the intensity is too high, as we did in the video 2 for the lactate system, the lactate and the hydrogen are transferred out of the muscle cell and into the bloodstream, taking the pH of the blood down. We also generate or resynthesize 2 ATPs through this process. However, at this point, we've now got enough oxygen coming through, because our heart rate and our breathing rate are nice and high, to add to the pyruvate. This combines together and comes into a new system called the Krebs cycle. Cyclical, as the name would suggest, pyruvate and oxygen join together and form acetyl coenzyme A. Acetyl coenzyme A. Now we've got a number of chemical reactions that are happening around here, lots of them. We need to know the general gist, and that is hydrogen ions play a major part, and they are carried around Krebs cycle on something called NAD. So they can attach themselves to NAD. So hydrogens get carried around. As different chemical processes occur around the Krebs cycle, we actually, at this point, will get rid of a waste product. And that waste product is carbon dioxide. That will be expelled into the bloodstream and out through the alveoli. We also resynthesize another 2 ATP molecules. So already we're on a yield of 4 ATP molecules. Now, what happens in this cycle is we've got hydrogen being kicked out all of the time when it goes round Krebs cycle. So hydrogen is passed through to the electron transport chain with something called electrons. These are chemicals, they're molecules again, and again, we don't need to know the ins and outs. We just need to know there are chemical reactions using these electrons, hydrogen ions and oxygen. And what happens is chemical changes occur, so process after process after process, and at each stage of the electron transport chain, we are resynthesizing an ATP molecule. We are also getting rid of another waste product which contains hydrogen and oxygen that we now no longer need, and that comes out in the form of H2O or water. So the byproduct of the aerobic system is carbon dioxide and water. And through each of these stages, while we're manipulating these hydrogens and these electrons, we are resynthesizing 34 molecules of adenosine triphosphate. So the 2 that we make in glycolysis, the 2 that we make in Krebs cycle, and the 34 that we make here in the electron transport chain means that we've got a grand total of 38 ATPs resynthesized with the complete breakdown of glucose. So what I'd like you to have a go at now, please, is to pause the video and copy out this table. And I would like you to fill in the missing areas. Now either use your notes from the video or use your textbooks. Please pause the video now. So this is what you should have answered. The ATP-PC system yields 1 ATP per molecule of phosphocreatine. The lactate resynthesizes 2 ATPs for each molecule of glucose through anaerobic glycolysis. And the aerobic system generates 3 per molecule of glucose, 2 through glycolysis, 2 in the Krebs cycle, 34 in the electron transport chain. The speed of production for the ATP-PC system is very fast, so something like a jump or a kick or a shot put. The lactate system is fast, so I'd use it to mark a player for potentially 1 minute. And the aerobic system is very slow as we're waiting for all of this oxygen. So that would be me running back into position, or the ability for me to continue to exercise for the 90 minutes of the match. So it's the underlying energy system all the time. So we're looking at the energy continuum now. So think of this a little bit like the recruitment ladder in the muscular system in A2. And we've got 3 energy systems at our disposal. One's very quick, one's moderately quick, and one's pretty slow but very efficient. So the fast one obviously is teamed with the fast high intensity activity. The slow aerobic system is teamed with low intensity. And the moderately fast one is teamed with moderate intensity. And this is generated, or this is considered to be the energy continuum. What we need fast, what we need slowly, and what we need moderately. So we think of them as taps. Now these 3 taps exist alongside each other. We do not turn all the other taps off while we're using a tap. So this tap here represents the aerobic system and is always working. Now we can increase this drip to a steady slow pour and put it down to a drip again depending on what low intensity exercise we're doing. If we're laying in bed, it will be a drip. If we're walking slowly, then it might be a steady stream. But we have to have enough oxygen to enable that to work, and it has its limits. This one represents the lactate system, where we can get quite a lot of ATP regenerated fairly quickly without the use of oxygen. And this one represents the ATP-PC system, which means we can get an awful lot of energy very quickly, again without the requirement of oxygen. If we are exercising in a game of netball, let's say, and we're playing netball, we're waiting to start the game, I'm predominantly using this system. I need to sprint out for the first pass, so I'm going to use this system because it's high intensity. This system will still be working. If I sprint out and pass the ball and have to make another sprint and another sprint and another sprint, so I am working very hard, but for now longer than 10 seconds, this middle system is going to be my predominant energy source. When I'm walking back into position or I've got half time, these systems are going to start to recover, and this system will continue to work. Then if these systems are recovering by just low intensity or periods of rest, when I next need a high intensity bout of exercise or a sprint or a jump or a rebound, I can use this system again. It'll be ready for me to use. Have a look at this in a different way, and you may see these come up in exam papers. You can see here this represents the ATP-PC system, and it lasts for 10 seconds. So this is a 10-second line, and it says that it runs out after that point. The lactate system is working initially, even in those first 10 seconds when the ATP-PC system is regenerating most of our ATP. This lactic acid system is up and running. The glycolysis, anaerobic glycolysis, has started. And around 1 minute, it's our predominant source. And look, this one takes such a long time, but it's always working. And this is its fastest. When it plateaus here, that's as fast as it can go. So anything that you need above and beyond that will have to come from these two systems. Now let's have a look at an exam question scenario. And we are jogging, so we'd be using this aerobic system normally, and we're jogging and we come across a hill. Now up until the hill, the aerobic system has supplied all of our ATP. It's been fine, so we've just plateaued as we go along. But now we need a little bit extra, and we are going to get this from the ATP-PC system. So there's a sharp hill that takes us about 5 seconds to get up, or maybe we're overtaking someone. But at this point, we need a higher intensity of exercise, and that comes from the ATP-PC system. Once we've used our 10 seconds, so let's say we're trying to run up the hill or we're trying to overtake someone, and we start going into 15 seconds or more, we are then going to start relying on this lactic acid system to fill this void above which the aerobic system is limited. When we reduce our intensity and go back to relying on this aerobic system, these two systems can then start to recover. This can happen numerous times in an event. So what I'd like you to do is stop the video, please, and use your notes and your textbook to try and fill in these spaces. So we're looking at the fuel, and I've left one in as an example. The duration, I've left one in as an example. The intensity, and any byproducts, whether harmful or not, that come as a result of these two energy systems. And a sporting example, please, of when you would use both of these. So here's your answers. Have a little check and let me know if there's anything on there that you're not quite sure of. Please update your answers. So the final thing I want to talk to you about is the onset of blood lactate accumulation. So we know what lactate is. We know that it causes us pain in the muscle cell, and we know why we have it. So let's just recap why we do get OBLA, and that is because we use glycolysis and we partially break it down to pyruvate, and at this point there is not enough oxygen coming in to join with pyruvate. So some of this pyruvate doesn't get an oxygen partner. And that doesn't get an oxygen partner comes out as lactate and as hydrogen ions, and eventually they're ejected into the bloodstream. Now this is a problem. So we're looking at OBLA, onset of blood lactate accumulation. So when this lactate starts to accumulate in our blood and cause us a problem. Now we talked about this lactate and the hydrogen reducing the pH of the blood, and it's all about this, reducing the pH of the blood, increasing acidity of the blood is a problem. So initially it's picked up by the chemoreceptors that will increase heart rate and breathing rate to help oxygen come in and to help get rid of this excess acid. So we call this onset of lactate accumulation in the blood the anaerobic threshold. So it's the point at which we have to stop relying on the lactate system, and that's around 3 minutes of moderate exercise. The problem with this is the hydrogen, and this is what's really causing the decrease in pH. But we now have lactate accumulating in the blood with this hydrogen. So this happens at high intensities of around 85 to 90%, where the blood lactate would read around 4 millimoles per litre of blood. This is when we start to have a problem. Lactate is being made faster than oxygen can be delivered. So this goes back to this little diagram here that I drew. Glycogen is going down into pyruvate quicker than oxygen can be supplied to pair up with pyruvate. So we have spare pyruvate that then has to dissociate into lactate and hydrogen ions. So that's this section here. So it cannot go into Krebs cycle. This eventually accumulates in the blood and will eventually prevent you from making energy in the aerobic fashion, because the body thinks it's working too hard and it's becoming dangerous, so it actually tries to stop you as a safety mechanism. Let's have a look at what this means on a table, or what it looks like on a table. So we've got level of blood lactate on the y-axis, and we've got intensity of exercise on the x-axis. So as you can see, as intensity of exercise increases, we hit our lactate threshold. That's the point at which we cannot deliver enough oxygen to make the energy through the aerobic system, so we rely on the lactate system, and it starts to accumulate in the blood and cause pain, and then starts to have a detrimental effect on our ability to produce energy. And you can see this is the point where it suddenly increases. Just want you to finally have a look at the energy system's recovery time. So if you remember, I said to you that when we're doing exercise, we will use all of these three systems like taps. We're going to turn one tap on and the other taps, this one will always be running and this one will just be running lightly, trying to get started for us. If the high intensity exercise continues and this one runs out, then this is the tap that we get most of our energy from, along with this one. If we reduce our intensity, then we won't use this tap either. These two taps will recover, will refill the tanks, and this one will become our predominant one. Oh, we've got to run again. The ball's coming towards us, so we use this one again. We're still tracking somebody, we're still marking somebody who's working fast, so we're using this tap. What you need to remember is these taps can be refueled, they can be refilled when given time off, but the aerobic tap never stops. It just reduces in the amount of energy it produces and then gets turned up again to go to its maximum when intensity increases. But high intensity exercise still uses the aerobic system. So let's have a quick look. ATP-PC system only takes between 30 seconds and 4 minutes to recover. And that can recover when you're still doing exercise as long as it's lower intensity. The lactate system takes between 20 minutes and 2 hours. So if you think about it, at half time, most of that system will be replenished. If you've had a particularly tough match, it'll take you a couple of hours to regenerate that system and be able to use it efficiently again at the end. Now, an aerobic system takes between 2 and 48 hours to completely recover. And that means to restore the glycogen stores in the liver and of the muscles. And this means that we need to eat food, we need to convert the macronutrient of a carbohydrate back into glycogen and store that in the muscles and the liver for next time we do a marathon run or a 5K or play a game of netball. I hope that makes sense to you. You've got the OneNote as well. Start to do your questions, do your further reading, make your notes and come back to me if you've got any questions.